Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we've witnessed the second week of a free 5-star constellation, and this time I have secured the Dehya constellation, which might sound like an odd choice to a lot of people, but for me, this is of course her 6th and final constellation. And with this constellation, I would like to go so far as to say that not only does she become decently strong, but she also becomes quite a lot of fun to play. First things first, I say Dehya. Dehya. This is the pronunciation that is provided to me by a Pakistani Muslim friend of mine. That's why I don't say Tainari over Tignari. But Dehya is fine too. It doesn't really matter how you pronounce her name. Now, getting to a point where I could even grab this free constellation and call it a day was definitely years in the making. So let's first break down how it is possible to end up with C6 Dehya in the first place. Number 1. You gotta lose a 50-50 on the event banner, in which case she's one of 8 possible standard characters. Number 2, you roll on the standard banner, in which case she becomes a 1 in 18 chance because there's characters and there's also standard weapons. Number 3, you can win a 50-50 on a Sumeru Chronicle banner that has showed up and disappeared a while ago now, so we don't know when that's ever coming back. Number 4, you could actually lose the 50-50 on that same banner, in which case she's a 1 in 6 chance among other Sumeru characters. Number 5, you could have gotten her during her original release banner, which hasn't come back in years. Number 6, there is the yearly free standard 5-star. And number 7, there is the +1 constellation event that I got my C6 from. The first 2 options, the yearly freebie and the aforementioned +1 constellation event, they're all evergreen, so you'll see them from time to time. But note, once you pick her in the constellation event, you can't pick her again. As far as we know, there's no yearly reset shenanigans. Sumeru Chronicle banner has, of course, come and gone. Her personal banner has only showed up once. So yeah, this took me literally years. Even with my spending habits, not a whale, but I do have C5 Miko, my final constellation came, of course, from this second round of the free 5-star constellation event. Before we dig into her kit, quick reminder, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit that like button, and, I'm going to continue with a series of videos on Columbina afterwards, so don't forget to subscribe as well for more Genshin Impact action. Let's start off by going through Dehya's kit. Her normal and charge attacks are basically worthless. Her skill, on the other hand, does have a bunch of uses. When you use her skill, you do effectively get to use it twice. The first time you will generate the field, but the second time you can use it to reposition that field. Now at C0, the field lasts for 12 seconds and the skill has a 20-second cooldown. 9 seconds after using her skill, if you are inside her field, as part of her A1 passive, your character's interruption resistance becomes pretty damn high. If enemies are also inside the field and they take damage, Dehya will hit them with some off-field Pyro damage. Now, every hit applies Pyro with no ICD. This actually makes Dehya a pretty solid off-field DPS and Pyro applicator. There's also a mechanic where if you take damage inside her field, Dehya will actively take a portion of that damage instead. Basically, up to 56% of the damage you receive is actually mitigated by being sent to Dehya instead. She will then store it as like a pool of damage that she will take over time as a DOT, even while off-field. The damage mitigation unfortunately does not work on shields. Maybe if we get Sumeru buffs, the damage mitigation can work on shields as well. That would actually be quite nice, in my opinion. Now, normally, this would mean that she could die off-field as well, and that has happened before in encounters like Local Legends, but usually this is mitigated by Dehya's A4 passive of self-healing. When her HP is below 40%, she immediately heals 20% of her health and then 30% over 10 seconds. This particular effect does have a 20-second cooldown. It's usually around that time that you run the risk of Dehya dying if you are fighting something that happens to be doing terrible, terrible damage. Her ult is where the vast majority of her damage can in fact come from. Now, my guess, because I don't really know for sure, is 70% of her DPS comes from her ult at C5. Now, when you activate her ult, she will in fact start punching enemies, and normally she'll just be slowly punching, but the goal is to make her punch faster and therefore punch more by using her normal attack or skill buttons. The more she punches, the faster she punches. You usually can get 10 punches in per ult. At the end, she'll also do a jump and then do a dive kick that actually does a fair bit more damage than a punch. So Dehya has two different play styles, and honestly I would argue that the one you lean towards would be determined more by which constellation of hers you currently have. The less constellations you have, the more you're going to probably lean towards having a defensive Dehya playstyle, whereas the more constellations you have, the more you're probably going to want to consider using her as a DPS. However, HoYoverse in their infinite wisdom decided to give Dehya a way to cancel her ult by jumping. Because of this, Dehya can actually get hard countered by enemies that freeze her, because when that happens, usually one of two things will happen. You either wait to get unfrozen, in which case that just takes a long time, or you mash the jump key in order to break free. The problem is you will accidentally press it one too many times, you end up jumping out of her ult anyway. So in general, if you know you're going up against something that can freeze you, don't play DPS Dehya. So unlike other comprehensive guides, we should probably go through her constellations first, because they tend to affect a lot more than other 5-star constellations. So, C1 gives her skill and ult some additional HP scaling. This wouldn't be the threshold that I would start recommending DPS Dehya just yet, but if you want to punch enemies anyway, this constellation tends to start lending enough weight towards HP artifacts over attack ones. C2 increases her skill duration to 18 seconds if you use her skill the second time. As a reminder, her skill has a 20-second cooldown, so personally, I find her C2 to be a huge game changer, especially for the defensive Dehya players. C3's ult levels, C5's skill levels, both of them are useful. C4 heals Dehya and also gives her some extra energy per punch. Now this does noticeably reduce her ER requirements, so that's actually really nice. C6 gives her punches some extra crit value, and each punch extends the duration of her ult. You get 10% crit rate and up to 60% crit damage. Now, in order to build this, you will need 2 seconds worth of punching, because this is 4 punches, and there's a half-second cooldown between each stack. The additional punches actually synergize with her C4 by giving you even more energy, thus further reducing her ER requirements. Essentially, you're looking at around about a 40% ER reduction with C4, or a 60% total ER reduction at C6. So with that in mind, the first playstyle I want to talk about is Defensive Dehya. Now to remind you all, we're using Dehya for her interruption resistance within the first 9 seconds of her field showing up. We're using her for the damage mitigation, where Dehya takes the damage. Keep in mind, she's actually a bodyguard in the game, so this does in fact make a whole lot of sense. And then we're also using her for the off-field Pyro app that has no ICD. Personally, I prefer bringing Dehya over bringing a shield, because a shield can break, and when that happens, I start taking full damage. The premise with Dehya is that even though you will take damage in her field, you're not going to be taking as much damage, and this would actually give your healers potentially a chance to heal, especially those healers that aren't healing as much. There are quite a few enemies these days that can do enough damage to almost one-shot some of the squishier on-field DPSs with, let's say, I don't know, a 17k HP. And sometimes we want to use healers who aren't the best healing, but they do in fact bring a bunch of buffs in the process, like Medic Mona. Also, if the shield breaks quickly, and some shields can, you end up losing all of your interrupt resistance anyway. Whilst Dehya's IR lasts for only 9 seconds, at least there is a guarantee of time. Meanwhile, of course, the other playstyle for Dehya is DPS, and that is just simply by punching the ever-loving hell out of your enemies. Despite using her normal attack as a button to make her punches punch faster, this is actually doing normal attack damage. She's still doing ult damage, so you're not able to make use of characters like Xingqiu Yalan if you want to react her damage. Instead, you're going to need off-field app that doesn't require normal attacks from folks like Fulia, Ganyu, Ayato, Furina, or even Columbina. Let's talk about teams, and we'll start off with Defensive Dehya teams. She can basically slot in any team that doesn't really care about the extra Pyro in the mix. That usually means any Geo team or Animo DPS team for that matter. Morlani teams actually like having Dehya as solo off-field Pyro. If you're going to play Morlani, I would avoid bringing Nahida though. There's some weird timing issues that could result in Pyro suddenly not being around anymore. If you're going to bring a Dendro character instead, I would go for Emily. This would be one of her teams to play. If you want to run a team with no healer, but you have a character who can self-sustain, then Dehya is in fact really good there as well. For example, you have an Arlecchino and Yelan team where Yelan is in fact enough Hydro app in order for both Arlecchino and Dehya to vape off it, so that's actually pretty nice. In a similar fashion, there are Cloran teams that can work with Dehya. Usually it's a Chevy Overload team, but it could also be a Burnload team with Durin, for example. Otherwise, there is Forward Vape Novelette. That works. Emily and Kinich burning teams actually work as well because Dehya can give that interruption resistance as well as some defensive utility, which is surely needed, especially for an on-fielder like Kinich. Cryo DPSs like Aloy or Risley can also use Dehya to easily maintain a Pyro aura for them to melt off. Otherwise, you could just basically use her as a random flex slot in a variety of teams that just want to have that defensive utility if you so desire. With DPS Dehya, well, we actually have quite a few options available. Let's start off with the Vape option. So in my opinion, Furina is probably the best Hydro option to bring on at the Dehya team. If you want to try and maximize Dehya's damage, her Hydro app plus the damage percent buff plus the fanfare from Dehya's self-heal is in fact really synergistic with Dehya. Mona can actually be very useful, especially now that the Omen is great with the Hexerei team, but you will potentially run into Hydro uptime problems because it turns out that Mona's skill taunt thing is not enough. It doesn't last long enough anyway for C5 Dehya, let alone C6 Dehya. And there are other workable Hydro options. We have Fulia Ayato, Ino even, potentially Nilu if you are truly desperate. You do have some ways to get that Hydro app. Meanwhile, we also have the Chevy Overload teams. Obviously, Chevreuse is going to be part of this, otherwise it wouldn't be called a Chevy Overload team. Supports for this team include Sarah, Ian-san, Bennett if you're desperate. Any Electro character as your final slot will work as well. Dehya can be your off-field Pyro plus Quick Swap DPS, so if you want to bring someone like Clorand and Varessa, they would be strong Electro on-fielders. Alternatively, you could play this as a Dehya on-field DPS team, in which case someone like the illustrious Yai Miko, the Wise and Beautiful, would of course be a really, really strong Electro off-fielder. The Raiden Shogun, though, can basically solve Dehya's energy problems, and this could turn the team into a really fun double carry team, so I do kind of recommend that. Next, we have Melt Dehya, and I just want to say that Sitlali alone doesn't seem to be enough cryo, even for not C6 Dehya, especially for C6 Dehya. So you will need double cryo, like with Rosaria or Burst Ganyu, for example, if you want to maintain that cryo aura. Now we move on to the OverVape Dehya archetype, and there's a lot of options to play around with. You have a lot of variety to choose from. I just want to mention that if you want to bring another Pyro character and you want to bring a buffer, I do find that C6 Chevreuse is in fact stronger than Bennett in these OverVape teams, not just from a team DPS perspective where Chevy can buff both the Electro and the Pyro character, but also from Dehya's own personal DPS perspective. She does seem to result in Dehya with Constellations doing more damage. Now, when it comes to your Electro character, I want to offer Ineffa as a really, really solid option because not only can she give EM to Dehya, she also brings a shield, which could potentially be a problem if you use the Bacon of the Red Seas, but also her Electro app doesn't require any normal attacks and it does last for a very, very long time, so she does end up being quite a lot easier to use. With that, you could bring someone like Furina, in which case you could potentially go for more Dehya damage. This would require Chevreuse to be on a healing build if you want to handle the HP drain coming from Salon Solitaire. Otherwise, I have actually found that the Ineffa Columbina option is really, really good. Now, obviously, Ineffa Columbina is a wheelchair, so putting that aside, just on a functionality perspective, this team does actually seem to work decently well. There is one problem though, which is that it does seem like Columbina's Hydro app is a little bit on the slow side, to the point where Dehya could end up accidentally removing all of the Hydro aura and then punch with no reactions at all, so you may find some reactions are missing in a team like this. But on the flip side, if you want to run Chevreuse on this team, you can actually run her with Favge and on a support build, so at least she could also buff Dehya and Ineffa even more. And on top of that, we even have a Hexerei option. Now in this team, we're going to be trying to leverage Mona's Long Omen plus Fischl's attack and EM buff in order for Dehya to do as much damage as possible. The Hydro app issue that I mentioned earlier for Mona is in fact solved by bringing Furina in the team. On top of that, Mona's normal attacks can also increase Dehya's next off-field vape, so there is in fact some additional damage coming out of that. That being said though, I have found this team to be a bit of a problem when it comes to energy. Even 160% ER doesn't seem to cut it. At the end of the day, OverVape Dehya is still a bit of a messy archetype, but I think the Fav Chevy plus Ineffa Columbina variation might be her most functional and in fact strongest team now. Building Dehya is actually a lot more complicated than most characters. Let's start with the easiest part, weapons. If you're playing with defensive Dehya, stick with Sack Great Sword if you don't have her C2. The hope is that you can get the skill reset so that you can later drop a skill again for less uptime. Do keep in mind that the interruption resistance period only happens for the first 9 seconds of her field generation and it has an 18-second cooldown. Afterwards, if you have a C2, you can basically use any other weapon. It's absolutely perfectly fine. Most folks would probably default to Favs then, since you're not really caring about anything else as defensive Dehya. If you're playing DPS Dehya though, well, now we can look at other weapons. Bacon is of course her best in slot, her signature weapon, but it is still super difficult to get this weapon these days. Otherwise, 5-star crit statistics are in fact very, very strong. When it comes to 4-star weapons, I want to mention that both Battle Pass weapons are actually pretty good, including Talking Stick. It is actually pretty decent if you're playing with Bennett or Dory, or if you know for a fact that you're going up against something that can apply elements to you as part of its attacks. The Melusine Claymore is actually very strong as well because it has an ER substat and a whole bunch of attack. There's also Master Key, which is another ER substat weapon. This can work really, really well in that Ineffa Columbina OverVape variant that I mentioned earlier. And finally, let's talk about artifact sets. If you're playing defensive Dehya, Tenacity of the Millilith is the most straightforward set to use. It gives Dehya some HP so she can soak more damage. Her skill hits enemies every 2.5 seconds, which, surprise surprise, is a shorter interval than the 3-second buff duration, meaning you have no downtime for Tenacity of the Millilith so long as you are always attacking enemies. Otherwise, Serenade or Deepwood are what I would call desperate options. Usually, teams that make use of this would already have someone on them. At C2+, you could potentially boost your off-field DPS anyway, in which case there's Vodukashas or even Golden Troop would be the way to go. If you're playing a Kinich or Emily team, you could potentially put Dehya at C2+ on, let's say, Reverie, the Burning set as well. For stats, really, HP is the only thing that matters at this point. Just get as much as you can. If you're running Faj, then of course, getting as much crit rate as you can is also a really good idea. Unless you're hoping to play Dehya as that off-field DPS as well, in which case we might as well talk about DPS Dehya as a whole, because when it comes to her, Vorukasha is her overall best-in-slot artifact set. So long as you are taking some form of damage, be it from other characters who are inside her field or just directly as herself, Dehya will be able to maintain the buff. This will affect both her off-field pyro damage and her punches, by the way, so it is in fact very comprehensive. If you're playing with someone like Ineffa, try to only use her ult and avoid her skill like I mentioned, because that could bring up a shield which could potentially mitigate damage or at least block damage from hitting Dehya. At lower constellations and in teams resulting in higher ER requirements, and when running, let's say, an ER substat weapon, you could potentially just consider running EOSF if you want to focus on punches and just doing more of that punch damage. If you're playing with Furina, Marachose is a perfectly good option. In the Ineffa Columbina team, of course, the Nod Cry DPS set will work as well. And if you're playing the Burning team, then of course, like I mentioned, the Reverie Burning set is very, very good for her. Dehya's ER requirements are actually kind of huge if you want to be able to punch every rotation. So from C0 to C3, you're looking at upwards of over 200%. So that's kind of why it's very difficult to recommend DPS Dehya. From C4 onwards, you're still looking at potentially 170%, which is kind of what I was using from time to time in order to be able to punch every rotation. I have C6 Dehya. Sometimes I can get away with 160%. I feel like more than that is still required. So if you want to get away with those lower ER builds, you're going to have to rely on Favges and Pyro Particles. In the B role, the Chevy teams are running around with about 120 ER on Dehya, whereas other teams would have Dehya's ult getting back in time by having around about 150, 160 ER, even with the C6 that I have. Hey guys, it's Kate the Editor. I'm here with Dehya in front of the Ruin Legend because I wanted to just show you how much energy you would need in order to make a team like this work. So we actually have Dehya on 135.5 ER, running Bacon, running Vorukashas, and of course I have her C6. Meanwhile, I have C6 Chevreuse. This is sort of important. We also are running Maidens, or rather we're running Magical Girl, we're running Maidens. So this is of course a healer build on Chevreuse. We're not dealing with Fab shenanigans. We've got Ineffa on a build that has 188 ER. We've got Columbina on a build that has 172, let's say, ER. So what we can do, especially with the C6 Chevreuse, is something like this. We will ult into hold skill into Dehya, and we're going to leverage Chevy C4 actually into another hold skill into, and just like that, Dehya's ult is in fact ready to go. We will need to do that though. Ignore the damage, obviously Ruin Legend has a Pyro resistance going on, and that is with 135.5 ER. So that's something that we can actually do without needing to rely on something like Maiden, so that if we are fighting something that does a lot of damage that is still getting mitigated by Dehya, we still have some pretty sizable healing coming out of Chevreuse, and this would also work if you were to bring Furina instead of Columbina. With that in mind, your sand can be ER or HP, your cup could also be Pyro or HP. I found that both of these options can be relatively similar in damage, so it can be both team dependent and also which one has the better substats, and your hat should be crit. It's possible that there is a team out there where your HP hat could be stronger than, let's say, a crit damage hat, but I haven't really found that myself. We do have simulacrums now, so you can always test your builds out to see what's stronger. At the end of the day, C6 Dehya is not some kind of brand new meta DPS or anything. Far from it, and it's very tricky to get her to clear things like Fearless, Stygian Onslaught, but what I really like about her is how tanky she is and how tanky she actually makes her entire team while still being a perfectly fine DPS. So if anything, she's one of the most comfortable DPSs in the game, putting her alongside folks like Nouvelette in terms of how chill it is to play her in fights, so long as of course you are able to meet those ER requirements.
Cleanup sequence initiate. Drop your weapons! Let's get it on! Yoo-hoo! Annihilation mode. Blocks off!
I warned you! Looks like violence is here!
Defensive mode engage. Time to shine! You asked for it! Stop right there! Buckle up! Hi! Ultimatum protocol. Final warning! You're dead meat!
Now that I have her C6, I will probably be playing with her more when I need a Pyro DPS. I'll certainly be playing her more than the likes of Garming, Yanfei, Hu Tao, or Diluc these days, so we'll just have to see how things turn out. And perhaps one day we'll get Sumeru buffs that will make her great. We'll just have to see. Anyway, I think that'll do it for today's Dehya guide. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. How do you feel about Dehya, or Dehya, in Genshin Impact? Let me know in the comments. Do you play her? Has my pronunciation of her name made you want to, jump off a cliff? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and as always, until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Annihilation mode.
I'm still collecting data.
Justice will prevail! Look alive! You're dead meat!
Excellent. You barely managed to touch them.
Defensive mode.
remnant. So you'd rather wallow in this rotten, decaying world?